We're now moving to our last panel. In a moment, I'll ask all the panelists
Okay,
and the moderator to
and
come
then
up.
the last point is that we face challenges, but supply chain issues last year were not limited to Southern California. Supply chain can be disrupted by any number of factors. It is not only a question of congestion, larger vessels. Sometimes it's a function of weather. And so the East Coast supply chain was dealing with that in 2014, with goods from New York and New Jersey being diverted to places like Savannah and Charleston, not because of labor issues, which we've talked a lot about here, but also because of weather. And then we had truckers strike in Vancouver, which is also part of the West Coast of North America string, and then the larger vessels being part of the broader supply chain. Okay, so before we bring the panel up, I did want to raise the issue of suggest the executive order is a good place to start for our distinguished panel. Because it's a critical policy initiative that impacts all of the supply chain stakeholders, people who are engaged in goods movement in the state. Right? And as you can see here, I put up the language and highlighted sort of what are the three parts of a stool, right? Which are increasing economic competitiveness, movement toward zero-emission vehicles, and improved freight efficiency, right? And the other thing that was raised this morning, which is interesting from a policy perspective, are the number of agencies, organizations involved. The opportunity is that by cooperating, collaborating, working together, we get something that works for the state. The challenge is these are all different organizations with differing missions, differing functions, and differing outlooks on the goods movement state. So with that, I'd like to call up our panel to talk a little bit about the supply chain and the opportunities and challenges moving forward. So if I could have them come up. Trenches on these issues for a long time. We have Mary Nichols, who's the chair of the California Air Resources Board. Hassan Ikrata, the executive director of the Southern California Association of Governments. Peter Herzog, the assistant director of NAOP, a commercial real estate development association. Don Snyder, the director of business development for the Port of Long Beach. And Nick Weiner, the campaign director of Justice for Port Drivers, International Brotherhood of Teamsters. And I'm going to start again with this framework. And Mary, I'll start with you. That's okay. Didn't give you too much of a time to catch your breath coming in, but thank you. And I wanted to ask you, of those three legs, is there a piece that is more important that we need to work on first, or are these three aspects of the supply chain that we can work on at the same time?
They must be worked on at the same time. They not only can be, they must be. That's the vision behind the governor's executive order and behind the Sustainable Freight Initiative that we're involved in. It represents many years of collective experience on the part of the state agency officials who are involved here, and a lot of conversations with many of the people in this room about what it will take to get us to our combined goals. We cannot possibly address one unless we're addressing them all at the same time, and if we allow ourselves to be split off in some way where one becomes more important or moves in any significant way faster than the others, we're going to fail.
Follow-up question. Do you see any potential challenges from a coordinating perspective in the agencies? What would be the first step in getting everybody to
Coordination is incredibly difficult. It's not easy. We all, as you pointed out in your opening remarks, the state agencies alone all have different missions and things that we work on separately, and yet in this effort we have to work together. I think our stakeholders in some instances do work together and collaborate. In others, they compete with each other, or at least have different perspectives on the world. And so getting all of these folks in whatever shape of table and room that we need to have, rooms to look at data, to share information, to bring forward information that we all need to do a better job of making policy is going to be a challenge even to start with. But in addition to just getting some common information that we can work from, I think it will also be necessary to overcome a pattern of years and decades, really, of having assumed that each was not going to be willing to work together. And so that in and of itself is something that we have to address.
Thank you. Hassan, you're at the MPO level. What role does sort of regional planning play in making sure that the governor's executive order is implemented effectively?
Well, thank you. Thank you for, let me take the advice here. I'm going to try. This is, thank you for having us. I appreciate what the chairwoman just said. Look, if there's an issue that's actually national, not only state and regional, it's goods movement. And if there is a frustration for me is we're just beginning to get some national policies in place to make sure that we as a state of California, as a region, can compete. Very good news coming out from Washington. For the first time in the history of transportation bills, actually goods movement is going to be specifically mentioned and funded. David and I from the Port of Los Angeles saying, would you be happy with the Senate part, the House part? I would be happy with any money because it's more than zero. So the region, so it's a national in general, but the region also has to figure out a way how to get this very complicated logistic industry moving throughout the region. And I have to say this, for a sector that's responsible for 1/3 of the state's economy, we have to take this seriously. We have to take the executive order of the governor serious. We have to take the balance seriously, because I believe very strongly that we're not going to reach that balance by just regulating. We're not going to reach that balance by just simply saying, let's work together. We're going to reach it by making sure that technology advancement is combined with government and the stakeholder, like the chairwoman alluded, the stakeholder has to be at the table from the get-go. So the region and SCAG, my agency, has been at this for over 30 years. And I'm happy to report that we're getting somewhere in terms of coordinating the different entities that we need to do. Second, and we don't like to talk about this, but goods movement is like the hidden hero. You know? We don't hear about, especially our young kids here, the millennials, they have no idea what's involved to get that product home. But when you think about it, it's very complicated, and some agencies need to coordinate much more closely. I appreciate the ports and what they're trying to do. I appreciate all the agencies involved. And I applaud the governor by calling for a balanced approach where we combine innovation, technology, and environment together, because one by itself cannot move the region.
Don, I'd like to ask you a similar question about the port's perspective of the executive order.
Okay, first and foremost, you know, the aim of the transition to zero emissions is fantastic, and I think that lines up with the goals of the port. And you know, the fact, I was born and raised here, so the fact that you can see the mountains most of the year was not something you would do in my youth. And the fact that you can inhale without coughing is something. So I mean, we've made a lot of progress, but we still have a ways to go. So it's great everyone is aligned on that goal. But the additional thing, and I've combined the technology and the competitiveness, is that the abilities to keep our industry, our freight industry, on a level playing field, the ability to compete with anyone on any of the other gateways that are competing for our business is important. So the fact that the order has to do a competitive component and is part of it that makes it a good, sustainable goal.
Thank you. Sometimes, of course, the devil is in the details, and translating policy into implementation is the difficult part. And so for Nick and Peter, perhaps, what opportunities do you see from an order of this nature, and what challenges might there be for you in terms of operations?
Sure. Thanks,
Sure,
Tom. I'll go first. Well, I think actually a four-legged stool would be sturdier than a three-legged stool. There's a missing leg, and that's labor. I guess that'll be no surprise coming from me, representing the Teamsters. That there actually needs to be an even broader, more holistic view of supply chain policy that includes job quality and labor standards. Look, the port provides thousands of great jobs. We saw Bobby Olvera earlier on the panel. The longshoremen have great jobs. They do great work, and how they were able to unclog the port in rapid time because they have the best trained, most skilled longshoremen is not an accident. They've got a great union behind them. But as Long Beach Vice Mayor Lowenthal said at the beginning of the day, we shouldn't leave workers behind. And there's a lot of workers in the supply chain that are being left behind and that have been left behind. So I think we can do better. The Teamsters, we don't just represent truck drivers, but also locomotive engineers, rail maintenance away, warehouse workers. So we have an expansive view of the supply chain and understand the difference between a good job and a poor quality job. And what we've seen in the truck drivers and warehouse workers right outside of the gates that come, I guess, in and out of the gates, there's still a lot of work to do. As Mayor Garcia said, the changes are happening in the industry, but not fast enough, and more needs to be done. It's why the American Trucking Association says that there's a driver shortage of 100,000 truck drivers nationally because they can't pay truck drivers enough money to attract drivers to come into the industry. And everyone will agree that the drayage sector is the lowest paying sector within the trucking industry nationally. So that's a problem. It's the reason why the Clean Truck Program was needed in the first place and why there were thousands of dirty, polluting trucks, because that's what all the drivers could afford. It's why there's over 700 wage and hour claims by truck drivers over the last few years that are creating financial liability hanging over the industry of over $500 million. But drivers have to wait years for their claims to get heard. It's why the warehouse workers who work at the future SCIG facility have filed a class action lawsuit because they haven't been paid the living wage for the city of LA. And finally, it's why the drayage sector is considered one of the most dangerous and with the highest accident rates in the trucking sector in California. So we can do better. There's a lot of work to do. So I think adding another leg to the stool would go a long way to having a more comprehensive, holistic supply chain policy.
Thanks. Peter?
Thank you very much, and good to see everybody. And first, I want to thank everybody for staying. A lot of times in the afternoon it drops off, and it did, but you're the standouts that stuck by, so thank you very much.
There's dessert too. Don't forget.
Yeah. Oh, that's right.
I mean, I'm sure we're compelling, but there's also dessert.
So you're the sugar fans, I guess. Okay. No. This is actually a very serious subject. Obviously, from the commercial development real estate group, we fully support the fact that the increasing competitiveness has become right there with everybody else, and think that's extremely important. And glad to hear the panelists all agreeing. See, we do agree on some things. And I think there's great room for a lot more agreement to come. Our role, obviously, is to develop infrastructure for the goods movement system. And so we like to say we have come to love truckers, people that drive trains, and everybody involved in the goods movement system, because it's actually a system of systems. And maybe we could even add more stools, because the key thing is they all have to work together. If one part of the 3, 4, however many legs we want to add to it doesn't work, then that actually hurts the entire system. And so, again, having the executive order raise increasing competitiveness, not just competitiveness, increasing competitiveness is key. And it actually serves as a potential to lift all boats, those of the truckers that were just described, as well as others out there. There is a lot of work to do. But the fact of the matter is this is the place to do it. As the executive order points out, and Hassan has mentioned, the freight system is 1/3 of the California economy. $700 billion in revenue and over 5 million jobs. That's pretty much a cornerstone or a foundation for your economy for a state. Now, we can argue whether that's good, bad, or indifferent, but it's a fact. And I think we have to deal with reality through this entire discussion, and that is a reality. And that is a reality we have to address. Obviously, the environment is also extremely important, and there's a lot of good work that's been done and is going to continue to do. I went to the University of Redlands in the 70s and remember being right there at the foot of the mountain and not being able to see it. I remember it. And my wife is a lifelong resident of this area and can tell me all kinds of stories of even before that. And so we're making good progress there. But as was outlined, there are a lot of people, and particularly in the middle and lower class, or income levels, that have not recovered from the economic downturn and the recession. And in fact, since the recession has supposedly ended, median wages, particularly at the middle and lower income classes, has declined. It's declined. We have a situation where 24% of Californians are living in poverty. In the city of San Bernardino, 81% of the children that go to public schools are below the poverty level. And we have a situation, to me, if that's the case and that's the way things are going, then we have a crisis. It's not just something we have to deal with, it's something we have to deal with immediately and very, very greatly and work together. And so that's why I think it's so important that the stool does talk about increasing the competitiveness of the goods movement system. And again, there are a lot of challenges, but I think together we can get it done, and it's going to be an important day for California to get this right. It has to be done right, and we're on a very short timeline that makes it even more difficult. Thank you.
Thanks. Peter, I'm going to stay with you, given what you've just raised about wages, opportunities, employment. A lot of the changes in freight demand are being led by and driven by changing demographics, the rapid pace of technological development. How do we make sure, at least from your industry segment, that training exists to make sure that students who are looking for employment in the sector are well prepared for the positions that are available? And do you see a necessary tension between the use of technology and employment?
System, technology is a certain part of it, and so you do have that tension between the need for technology, both from an environmental aspects, because the efficiency leads to fewer emissions, and then of course, though, any potential displacement of workers. And so that is a balance that has to be achieved, and it's not an easy one. And the other aspect that's so important and why we have to concentrate so much on the workforce is currently in this region, 40% of the individuals don't have greater than a high school education. And what we have in the goods movement system is the perfect opportunity to provide opportunities, and again, there's work to do, but to provide opportunities that allow people to get decent jobs that have the benefits and everything that's needed. Is it perfect yet? No. Like I said, there's work to be done. But this sector, and again, being 1/3 of the state's economy, has the ability to provide that option. Again, if we work together, and I know everybody's been picking on the high school students over here, but there is definitely need to improve the training aspects. I mean, the truckers have the same kind of situation. I mean, it's true even with the warehouse workers, because the higher technology comes along with more technological skills that are needed. Warehouses are not your normal situation they used to be. If you go to the dictionary, it says it's a place to store things. No. There's very little storage that goes on now. It's really repackaging, moving, getting out, big clumps, little clumps, individual ones. It's a completely different operation. That requires completely different skills. Running around with your little forklift isn't what does it anymore. And so that whole skill set is needed. And we do need to have the kind of operations that you hear going on at some of the community colleges and some of the colleges to get that kind of training done.
I was just going to say that if a package is delivered by a drone, there isn't a driver who's driving up to your door and then lifting the package in, but there's somebody at a center who's operating that drone, and that could well be somebody who got their training in how to do that through the military. I don't think it necessarily is a college degree job, but it definitely is a high skill job, and therefore also a higher wage job. And I think we've seen transformations of that kind happening in other areas, and we need to be thinking ahead to how they're going to affect opportunities here and making sure that we do have the training available.
Hassan, you wanted to add something.
Just, I don't think we're even beginning to grasp of the impact of technology on urban policy. As a matter of fact, urban policy right now doesn't have enough time to react to the technology advancement that we're seeing out there. So there is a store in Sweden where you go by the store, it's a shoe store, you pick a model, a color, you put your foot through a machine, takes measurement, and a 3D printer will print your shoes in a couple of hours. How's that for a goods movement elimination of... So technology is going to impact a great deal of how this sector moves forward. The millennials, which many of them are here today, they're the most educated generation in America. They're the largest generation right now. Their attachment to technology and how they view technology is going to change how things... Peter said something that we have to focus on, and that is we are failing our kids in this region when it comes to education. Recently, a book written by Mike Stropper at UCLA compared Southern California to the Bay Area. And the relevance of that is he criticized actually Southern California for focusing on things like goods movement. Instead, he thought we should focus on the high-tech, Google and Facebook that's in the north, because definitely the income in the north is much higher than in the south. But I will come back and say, and I totally disagree in the book, we had a huge debate in which way LA. I think he's right on the income is higher, but Peter is right. Education is a key to how we're going to deploy technology for the future. And right now, if there is one leg missing from that stool, is how do we prepare a high-skilled labor force for the technological advances that we have. And that's something I do think is part of competitiveness that the governor is talking about in the executive order.
Nick, how are you addressing this challenge in the trucking industry? Getting younger people interested, addressing the impact of use of technology, responding to onboard readers, whatever it might be, maintaining fleets with alternative fuels. What's the industry doing to make sure you've got the next generation workforce ready for you?
Well, there's a lot of things happening, and I talk to truck drivers every day, and it's very uneven. There's some technology that's being introduced in the trucking sector with onboard technologies, but still the port trucking sector is undercapitalized. So you've got a wide range of the ability to take advantage and use the technologies. So we talk a lot about training of drivers and partnering with certain companies. But the existing workforce embraces a lot of that. There's been issues with early, alternative fuel trucks, like the first generation of LNG trucks, frankly, did not work out, and drivers hated them. And most of them are sitting in a yard somewhere, and most companies are trying to get rid of them. The newest generation of LNG trucks are getting good, much better reviews. But that's what is that? A 7-8 year lag from the introduction of the technology to where it's now finally seeming like it's up to par to actually sort of compete potentially with diesel trucks. So, it takes time. You need a system so that those technologies can be introduced in the market, not just at a kind of a pilot project stage, because then it's always going to be much too expensive to really get to the mainstream.
Thanks. You've all touched upon something, which is that there's this fragmentation in decision making. That's one of the things that the executive order, I think, is trying to address. The supply chain optimization group is trying to coordinate. But at the same time, a lot of the decisions are being driven by private sector actors who have a much shorter time horizon than some of the planning processes. So maybe I'll ask Don and Mary to talk a little bit about how you balance the very short-term next quarter, if not tomorrow, interests of the industry with the longer-term goals that might involve long-term research and development, Mary, on the policy side.
Well, first of all, there is a mismatch. There's no question that industry needs to move faster, although I think some of the changes in technology that we're talking about and that we can foresee are not going to happen instantaneously. They are things we can see on the horizon that we know are out there, but probably the common thread in all of our concerns here is infrastructure, that wonderful word that we sometimes throw around loosely, but the fact is we're talking about a need to invest huge amounts of money to upgrade infrastructure. I think we can all agree to that. And to do that, you do have to have agreed upon plans. We don't necessarily have to sit there and draw up the perfect document, but we've got to come to a consensus about where we want to see the investments happening, what the priorities are, and then, some of the things that we can simply allow or expect that will be taken care of just as a result of changes in market demand and in the way that industry actually works. And I think one of the things that is happening now that is encouraging in that regard is that we're no longer only focusing on, in terms of the environmental regulatory side, which I come from. Of course, that's where my responsibilities and experience are. We're not just going from 5-year plan to 5-year plan. We really are looking out at 2030 for greenhouse gases, and a little sooner than that for air quality. But we've kind of learned and gained the confidence that we can continue to make incremental progress along the way and not have to expect that everything has to be done, this year. And I think if we can get comfortable with the idea that we know where we're going and that we're willing to invest on agreed-on strategies, and that we can set targets that then the private sector can help us meet, that we can get to where we need to go. But it does require a level of information and agreement about what the facts are that as of yet, I think we're moving there, but we're not quite there yet.
Don?
Well, then I can say thank you, Mary, kind of like the newscasters go back and forth. First, I'm glad you brought up infrastructure. I'll try not to be an advertisement, but as Rick said this morning, will be bookends. We're putting about $4 to $4.5 billion in a decade into infrastructure. And it's kind of roughly, and I'm not a planning person, so I'm not very accurate, but roughly 1/3 into terminals and making that transition between ocean and inland more effective. 1/3 into rail, because rail is a very important factor both for the efficiency of the supply chain, but for congestion, highway congestion relief, maybe even emission improvements. So we have 1/3 also going into the highway system to make sure that our truck assets are moving as effectively as possible. But if you just do infrastructure alone, take for instance, you get a restaurant, you put in all the finest equipment, and then you get a lousy chef and lousy servers, you're not going to go back to that restaurant. So it's how are the truckers operating, how are the railroads operating, the terminals, and all the supply chain folks. So it's important, and the port's working with the supply chain optimization teams to try and get the parties together. They're fairly disjointed, and a bigger thing is that they have different self-interests. The truckers are trying to maximize how they effectively move cargo via trucks, railroads the same thing, terminals and so forth. So pulling them together and trying to have these disparate views synthesized into solutions it's a challenge, but it's a lot of low-hanging fruit that are available. Now, as far as the short-term, long-term thing is that coming from the freight side of things, they take people like myself that have a very short attention span, because what have you done for me this week? So the ability for policy or improvements to work with industry on these short time frames to get things going is important, along with the longer term, how do we get to cleaner air? How do we get to a more effective, holistic freight system? Have to be matched and work together.
Correct me if I'm wrong, it seems to me that something like the Clean Air Action Plan was a model where that may have been addressed, where you actually had sort of an industry port sector driven solution that worked with policymakers in designing a policy that made sense for everyone. You think that's a fair statement?
It's a great example, I think.
I fully agree. I think the thing is that you got all the stakeholders from regulatory, ports, industry stakeholders that gave input to it, and then from that were very concrete goals to reach, and then a lot of interaction with all the different stakeholders to get from where we are to where we needed to be. And if I can plug our planning folks, one of the things that's important is the ability to listen to the people that actually operate the system, as well as the regulatory bodies, get what they have to say, and then go, how are we going to get to the solution? How are we going to clean up the air, the water, whatever, or improve the efficiency?
Well, and I would just add that because we had a plan that was agreed to, it freed up a lot of capital, both on the private side and the government side, to invest in making the transition happen. It wasn't perfect, and it would have been even better if there had been even more money, but it happened a lot faster than it would have otherwise.
And Nick, I know you were part of the Clean Truck program and the Clean Air Action Plan. Do you have the same sense?
I guess I was just going to comment that there's the inherent tension in the supply chain between infrastructure and having markets work together in a chain. So it's sort of like you're running a relay race, and the infrastructure is you have a beautiful racetrack, but each chain, you're passing the baton, from one person to the other. You don't want to drop that baton, but each person in that race is doing business with each other and trying to maximize their profit. So that baton can get fumbled even with a perfectly pristine track. And so that's, if we don't pay attention to both the market, the sort of labor and economic side, as well as the infrastructure side, you're not going to optimize the supply chain, and that's just an inherent tension and challenge. When earlier, I think it was Gene Soroka talking about the bigger ships, and folks were talking about the challenges that happened. Well, you had infrastructure that was built for certain markets. The markets changed. and then you need to change the infrastructure. So it's always going to be dynamic. It's never going to be perfect, and it's trying to sort of plan ahead of where those businesses, the supply chain is going to be, and how we want to try to sort of shape them so that they can work better together.
Hassan, did you have something?
Well, you know, this region identified $75 billion worth of infrastructure that we need to stay competitive. And this is not just SCAG, but it's SCAG with the stakeholders, public, private, ports, the state of California, Caltrans. Now, how much of the $75 billion are in the bank ready to be distributed for that infrastructure? Zero. And the state of California in 2006 did something great. They did something called TCIF, the corridor program. It's a $2 billion under Governor Schwarzenegger, $2 billion program that leveraged about $35 billion of local money in the 6-county SCAG region. That's the kind of thing that makes what everybody's saying here about the importance of infrastructure real. Right now, it's not really real. Washington is probably going to get us some. The state of California is debating right now where to get some funding. I know in terms of the technology advancement, their resources board identifies some fund. But we are talking about a lot of money needed to put the right infrastructure and to fix the infrastructure we have to stay competitive. And we have to face it. We're not having that discussion at that scale. We all agree that infrastructure is important, but when it comes down to how we're going to pay for it, then you start talking. I just share with you, recently I was talking in Orange County, and a nice person stood up and she said, I don't like you always talking about taxes. And I said, well, how do you suppose we pay for it? She said, let the government pay for it. So I didn't have the heart to tell her where the government gets its money. But if we really want to have a serious conversation about infrastructure and how infrastructure at the ports themselves and outside the port work together, we have to have a serious conversation about how to fund that infrastructure. And we've been at this for 20-some years. We were successful in 2006, and thanks for the state of California. And I hope, and I very strongly send letters left and right, that the TCIF experiment is a good one for California. It kept us competitive. I hope that's repeated. I hope the national level, I know. But to answer the question specifically, we need to involve the stakeholder early on in our long-term planning. And I agree with the chairwoman, planning takes time. One last thing, and maybe this is a whole discussion by itself. For us to be competitive, even if we had the money, we have to be able to move projects faster. The average infrastructure project, major infrastructure project in the SCAG region takes 17 years. I am almost certain we can be environmentally great and shave 5 years out of that. And if we do, economically speaking, we're injecting billions of dollars in the economy, hundreds of thousands of jobs. So we have a lot of things have to work together. Funding is major, but moving project faster. And I don't mean bypassing CEQA, by the way. I think CEQA is a great thing, but the abuse to CEQA is ridiculous. And that's where I say we could shave 5 years out of the 17 years from that ridiculous abuse. The mayor of Long Beach mentioned the Geralyn Bridge. The money was in the bank for 3 years. We were debating what kind of bike and pedestrian way we're going to have in that. My friends in the ports know that. So why unnecessary delays sometimes cost a lot of money to the industry and to the government. So that's infrastructure. We all agree we need infrastructure, but we need to have an adult conversation about how to fund that infrastructure.
And Hassan, and also maybe for Peter, you both are in the business of having to communicate the value of goods movement in one way or another to a pretty diverse constituency. Hassan, how many cities do you have in the SCAG region?
191.
Okay, and Peter, your constituents have to sort of make the same pitch to the cities where they're located about the value of the business that they bring. What's the bottom line for you when you're making that argument, and what seems to resonate with the cities that you're engaged with?
I'll start. I think SCAG is a membership organization. We're 6 counties, 191 cities. We have 190 members. And one city is not a member, shall remain nameless. But why do people belong to voluntary organizations? Because there should be a value added. I think the conversation with our constituents and the way it should be and it's taking place is there is certain things that you cannot say not in my backyard. There are certain things go beyond the boundaries of cities and counties. Actually go beyond even regions. In this case, the state of California, in even bigger case, it's a national thing. When we had the strike at the ports, we actually had data about every congressional district in the United States impacted by that strike. And so facts, I'm a strong believer that at the end of the day, facts is gonna stand. Maybe not right away, but eventually. And so by using information and facts, I think we were able to communicate the importance of this sector to all the cities in Southern California.
Peter?
I think Hassan closed on what is actually the major point. Facts are stubborn things. And we all may want to see Southern California having been something different. I mean, I grew up actually outside of Philadelphia, which is not anything like Southern California. It's like 2 different worlds. And so you can debate which is better. But the fact is we're here. The fact is we have 18 million people. The fact is we have all the businesses that those people require. Well, not all of them yet. We're trying to have all the businesses here that people require for their quality of life. The fact of the matter is the population is going to continue to grow. I mean, I always tease people. I mean, they can't outlaw sex. I'm sorry, we're going to have more children. I mean, the population is going to grow, and most of the growth in Southern California is not from people coming in, it's from births. We're not going to stop the growth. And everything that's in this room, everything you're wearing, everything you eat, everything, your car, your gasoline, anything you touch has gone through the goods movement system. Without the system, you don't have a quality of life. Or at least certainly none of the goods you need. You wouldn't have a house, you can name it. So the reality is, and the facts are, that we have got to sustain this system and actually make it grow. And that requires infrastructure of a variety of kind, whether it be trucks, what Hassan's responsible for, the warehousing, the railroads, the ports, you name it. Those are going to be required items. Now the thing, and we've been talking about it all day, is then to make all that work together in the best way possible. Everybody'd like perfection. I don't think it's going to happen, but we can make it the best it is. And that's what the things that SCAG puts together, that the truckers work on, that the ports work on, that then the building industry works on, is attempting to do, is bring products and infrastructure into Southern California that can meet the needs of the 18 million people and growing that are here. And that, to me, that's the message that has to go out. None of the people on this panel or that you've heard over this day are the enemy. We're all here to help. It's all in different ways, but it takes that package to make Southern California work. It takes that package for people to have the kind of life they want. And we're going to have to come together to make sure that package grows in a very effective manner for everyone of the 18 million people that are in this region.
When I'm out talking, either it's to people in the community and industry professionals, one of the challenges that I hear about the communications message is the multiplicity of planning efforts, the number of times people are asked for their input, not sure how it's used or where it's going. And taking seriously the concept of unleashing the power of participation and Stephen's exhortation this morning to tweet, how can we do the stakeholder input process better? How can we make sure that the information that is out there, the knowledge that's on the ground, the experiences in the communities actually inform the policy debate. Mary, I know CARB started a series of workshops last year. What did you learn from that experience, and are there things you do differently next time?
Well, sure. I think we didn't do as good a job at attracting all segments as we wanted to. Particularly at that point, I think there was a reluctance on the part of some of the beneficial cargo owners to come forward. They maybe didn't think that this was a process that they could trust, and so they didn't want to spend time in it. Some others, I think people were very faithful and came, but didn't necessarily believe that something was going to happen. And frankly, that was one of the reasons why I was a very strong advocate for the governor's executive order, because one of the things that people told us at the time was they didn't want to come to a process that was just being facilitated by ARB, even if other agencies came. You know, we're respected and maybe in some cases even feared as a regulator, but that doesn't mean that people think we have all the tools or all the answers that we need. And so by starting a process which has all the key agencies of state government visibly responsible, sitting at the table and being held accountable, we felt that that would be a way to attract the other stakeholders that needed to be there. And then, of course, beyond stakeholders, you have to reach out to the broader community as well. But the first step is for people to see that this is a place that's worth spending some of their precious time.
Don, I was wondering, the supply chain optimization group is a unique forum to sort of gather some of that input. Is that proving useful beyond the group itself?
Yeah, I think there's a few factors, and as Mary had indicated, sometimes it's difficult to elicit input. There's a couple of groups in the international supply chain. You have a number of companies that are foreign-based, and the last thing they want to do is get into a political tangle outside of their country. So, you know, there's a risk for how you get them to lower that risk for them to feel comfortable to give you the input you need to drive the solutions. The other thing, even on the domestic side, a lot of the importers, the cargo owners that Mary was mentioning, they're national brands, and they have to protect that brand. And there's a lot of concern about the messaging they do to make sure that their brand isn't tainted with saying something inappropriate offhand. So what we're finding, and I think in the Clean Air Action Plan and the different programs, was the ability to kind of lower the energy level or the stakes to allow parties to give you honest input and fit that in a way that you're also meeting the needs of the public sector of getting out to everyone and being very transparent. So we're finding each time you have a different supply chain group is you have to right size it, you have to make sure that everyone feels comfortable providing input, and that then the other thing is that you're going to come to conclusions that actually benefit the people that are participating.
We're going to open it up to questions from the floor in a minute, but I'm going to take the moderator's prerogative to ask one last question. The National Freight Strategic Plan draft is out on the street for review. There are a number of areas of priorities that include funding, institutional bottlenecks. Workforce is a key component, I'm happy to say, given the business I'm in. What's the key priority or strategy you want to see coming out of this national effort that helps us here on the ground in California? Yeah, Don?
Well, first, I think Hassan had said it, and then our group kind of coached me a little bit, is there's a lot of needs and there's a lot of demands throughout the country, and for us to get our share of funding, not only for the environmental issues, the competitive issues, it costs money to do these kind of programs. So, and I'll get a thumbs up from the group. Money, 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 I think, are high on the priority list to be able to implement all these programs.
Hassan?
I would say, yes, money, of course. But also there are some programs that, you know, it might work in the state of California, but might not work in Nevada or Arizona. And we need a national policy. We really do a national policy from this program that makes it easier to plan so that there's no disruption once we leave California. You know, we've been at this for a long time. This region has 18.4 million people. We shouldn't really try hard to be competitive in this region. And let me tell you why. Our port complex is one of 4 in the world that have deep water. We have 1.5 billion square foot of warehousing. We have still the best transportation network in the world. And we have 18.2, and if you include San Diego, we have 22 million people that we need to provide goods for. So the question is, why do we have to try so hard to compete? And one of the reasons is we really didn't have either a statewide, until recently, a statewide policies or national policy. So I hope this national policy, in addition to funding, will get us some national policies that apply nationwide so we don't have to worry. For example, let us assume that somebody want to do something in rail, or our 2 railroads are doing a great job, but you can't tell them to, say, for example, electrify in California, and then once you get to the Arizona border, deassemble and go. So that kind of, we need national policies to overcome these kind of challenges we have.
Look, I live in Washington, D.C., and sort of good luck getting funding out of Washington right now. So, you know, I hear I'm just highly skeptical. You mentioned, Tom, the Clean Truck Program. So I think there are smart ways to leverage private dollars, which I think particularly when faced with a policy crisis like the Clean Truck Program, something had to be done to clean up the trucks. And it was incredibly successful to replace 10,000 trucks ahead of schedule. Starting in 2008, if you'll remember, the depth of the recession, when no one could get a loan, our whole banking system almost collapsed. No one was buying trucks, yet somehow, you know, 10,000 trucks were purchased ahead of schedule. Sort of two policy, I mean, it was you know, brilliant. A truck ban combined with a dirty container fee, you know, right? So that the beneficial cargo owner could avoid paying a fee if they used a trucking company that had a clean truck and didn't have to pay the fee. That incentivized, you know, companies through a lot of negotiating with their customers to be able to finance thousands of trucks in 08, 09, and 10 when no one could get a loan. So there is a way to do it and leverage dollars and get the funding you need for infrastructure projects. It just is going to take a lot of creativity because I'm highly skeptical that we're going to get out of Washington anytime soon.
Also, O'Brien, just Nick, I would have been where you are a week ago, but we are going to get money from Washington. This is really the change of 25 years worth of work. The question is how much? Is it the Senate, the House, or somewhere in between? And what process? Is it competitive? Is it formula? But whatever it is, it's more than zero. So I would have been where you are, Nick, but we are going to get something from Washington.
Do we have some questions from the floor? Let's start here. And if you could wait for the microphone's coming. So. And I see lots of questions, which is good.
Thank you. Hassan, you gave me a good lead-in when you talked about that we're just beginning with the national policy and goods movement with the freight network. Well, in the bill that was passed by the House and it's going on its way to the Senate for a conference, my boss, Congresswoman Janice Hahn, submitted a couple of amendments. One of the amendments deals with the freight network, and she had a bill on that. And my understanding from the House is that $750 million of annual dedicated funding will go towards fixing the freight network and that last mile on that. The other thing is that the other amendment of hers that passed is to allow for work training programs in that transportation bill. The Congresswoman likes to call it skills that pay the bills. And so this will bring in transportation training, work training for a lot of young people. So addressing a couple of the issues that you talked about.
Yeah, and I want to thank your boss, Congresswoman Grace Napolitano, who are assigned to the conference committee, and Barbara Boxer. And just one thing, while we're going to have some money for freight corridors, I have a gray hair. I've been in this business for a long time, I think. It's time for me to think about. But we started in 1998 talking about freight corridors moving from the port in the 17, east in the 16, north in the 15. Clean freight corridors. We would like them to be totally clean, tolled. I know that trucking and our friends might say, why toll it? But this is a different conference. Probably a great example of public-private partnerships. And we are 20 years later still about to complete one EIR. Shameful. Not good. Very bad. So sometimes, while our national leaders is saying, I'm going to give you some money for this, we're still figuring out how we move forward with this kind of things. But again, I believe facts is going to move us forward. We need this freight corridor system to stay competitive. When 1/3 of your economy depends on this, and that's what the executive order is about. We need to stay competitive.
Question right here.
Question on this side of the room? Oh, okay.
Hi, good afternoon. Good afternoon. My name is Geralyn Lopez Mendoza with SoCalGas. I also served on the Port of Los Angeles Board of Harbor Commissioners from 2005 to 2010, when we were actually developing the Clean Air Action Plan and the Clean Truck Program, along with a cast of thousands that included David Freeman and Jim Hankla and Mario Cordero. So I know where the bodies are buried. But my question to you today, we're talking about the whole system, this whole supply chain and its future and how it all fits together. And as it relates to the non-road, very heavy-duty vehicles that are involved in freight movement, specifically ocean-going vessels, harbor craft, and rail, when you start talking about going toward zero emission, there aren't a lot of options in the zero emission category for ocean-going vessels, those very heavy-duty engines. The ocean-going vessels that are trying to be cleaner and move away from bunker fuel, which for those of you who don't know is a byproduct of oil and gas production, it's a sludge that they burn in ocean-going vessels, they're moving towards LNG. As well as some of the locomotives are moving to LNG instead of diesel. So my question is, as you think about the system as a whole, from the ocean-going vessel to when it gets to its ultimate destination with the beneficial cargo owner, what role do you see natural gas playing in the future of our economy as a transportation fuel, as a source of energy? I know the Port of Long Beach is working on an energy island, and I just would appreciate any of your thoughts in that regard. Thank you.
Sure, Don.
I can start since we have Energy Island. In addition to the environmental and operational efficiencies, is the ability to provide a dependable flow of different types of energies that will make sure that port operations, as well as the proper environmental foundation of clean air happen, and LNG is part of it. There are a number of different technologies that are out there and types of sources of energy. Rick's, okay, so far I'm doing good. He knows more about it, but the idea is that we want to develop technologies and different sources of energy that provide clean and dependable sources of energy for us, as well as working with the other entities around us. And to your point there, I think it's the first LNG vessel, tote lines, is going into service between, it's going into the Puerto Rico service, so that's South Florida there. So that's pretty exciting, and I think they're also looking at other closed loops like the Pacific Northwest into Alaska. So I think there's, LNG is one of a number of different types of energy types that we hope that will take us clean and dependable.
And just briefly, I think natural gas, we call it zero and near zero for a reason. I think natural gas has to be part of the solution. I do think that we're going to do this in stages, but I am a strong believer that the technologies we have today involve all zero, near zero, natural gas, electric, and other fuel types.
Yeah, I mean, all of the above is a buzzword. Another buzzword is life cycle. And when we're talking about a world and global trade, which is what we're dealing with here, we're also having to deal with the whole chain of emissions. So natural gas needs to be thought of as renewable natural gas that comes from methane that could otherwise be waste. And when you start opening up to that kind of talk, then you're thinking about a whole lot of different ways of getting energy and using it. So yes, absolutely.
I have a question over here.
Yes, I just have a comment for Mayor Nichols. I just came back from a conference with USC in Shanghai, and there was a discussion on your approval of this AMIC system for the Port of Long Beach. And there was a lot of excitement over that because, as you know, a lot of the ports in China and a lot of the cities in China are extremely polluted. So I just wanted to thank you for that, for your vision, Mary, because your decisions is having worldwide implications. So thank you very much. And there's a delegation from Guangzhou from the port coming to the Port of Long Beach next week to see that system. So thank you.
It's the easiest question you'll get all day.
Yeah, really. Okay.
Do we have another question?
I agree.
Was there a question, another question over here?
Tom?
Oh, sorry, yes. Okay. Akiko.
Hi, Akiko Yamagami from Southern California Association of Governments. Nick, I totally agree with you that we should take a four-legged approach, including labor. Having said that, just listening to your discussion this afternoon, I was thinking, so the technology advancement is often observed in areas where the gap currently exists. And I would say the driver shortage and wage issues is perhaps a gap that currently exists that needs to be addressed. So my question to the panel is that, before I go into the question, so there's a possibility that the R&D for autonomous trucking may accelerate more so than for the passengers because of the existing gap for driver shortage. With that, my question to the panel is, from a policy point of view, what would you say we should spend our limited funds on more R&D for the autonomous trucking, or should we use the money to address driver shortage and wage issues?
You want to start with that, Nick?
Well, I think even if, actually I've had some conversations recently with other folks at the Teamsters about the future of trucking and that being actually a real possibility, although it's sort of hard to imagine, like, would you get on an airplane, without a pilot? I'm not sure we want trucks, that have 80,000-pound loads behind them without a truck driver in them. But having said that, there's going to be investment into those technologies, and that's a real possibility. But it's not going to happen tomorrow or the next day. So there's, I don't think you can choose one over the other because there's issues that need to be dealt with right now, independent of what may happen in the future with technology in the industry. So I think you sort of have to deal with both.
Don?
Additionally, if you're saying technologies, one of the things the port is looking to do is increase use of rail, both long haul but also short haul. We have a shorter term goal of 35% of all the volume coming to and from the port going by rail, and that would, and taking it maybe to over half of our volume going that way. So that's going to need to be some of the local cargo. So as Nick points out, there's a lot of fear about, both passenger cars and then bigger vehicles about, it being some technology. So I think there's lower hanging fruit for, if there is available funds, to put it into rail. But also, the truck is a great way of moving product. He's sitting close to me, so I want to say that. But it's definitely a great way of moving product. Some of the key challenges right now is the throughput. How do you move a truck in and out of a terminal? How do you get it over the highway system so it's used effectively? So I think there's other ways that you could prioritize before you get to that kind of technology.
Peter.
Yeah, I think a lot of this with the policy issue, it's prioritization. There's a whole ton of ideas out there. But, we have to set priorities, and I think there's two leading ones. I mean, we have, federal air quality standards, state air quality standards, other various regulations that need to be met. And then we have what I discussed earlier, which is the economic aspect and the need to get good quality jobs so that 24% of the people of California are not in poverty. And to me, the priorities should be on working both on the air quality and the jobs aspects. I think those are the critical ones. And on the air quality side, there has been an awful lot done over the last 20, 30 years, which we've talked about before. And the ports have done a lot, the truckers have done a lot. The truckers are spending about $1 billion a year on cleaning up trucks, and there's more to come. So I think what we need to do is prioritize and look at when we're dealing with technology, what's real and not real, how long is it going to take, and how much is it going to cost? Because none of this is on the plate now. Even these, I know Google's running their car around, and one got pulled over by a cop yesterday, which is pretty funny, but for going too slow. So anyway, but setting that aside. But there's all kinds of technologies going on out there. But we've got to, I think, focus on the priorities that really are needed in Southern California. And again, as I said, I think it's, we've got all these air quality standards that have to be met, and really that's going to go to the near zero emissions. A lot of us might have liked muscle cars a long time ago, but I mean, that's just fact if we're going to meet these standards. And so you need to then put your money there. And we don't necessarily, I think, so much need regulations. It's the money to build the new technological advances of the engines. That should be the focus, number one. And then again, on the employment aspect. So to me, that's how I would prioritize it. And I think then a lot of the other stuff will probably come along. Maybe I'm not as old as the son, but maybe I'm old enough to think. I kind of like truck drivers and people in trucks and in trains too. And so I'd be more inclined to stick with him than these driverless things.
Okay, so I'm gonna come to the defense of the best employee at Southern California Association of Governments, Akiko here, and I'm gonna say, your generation and mine are not ready for having, the technology take over. But I think the millennial generation, which is now the largest, are ready for that. Let me tell you a couple of things. One is, how many of you use Uber and Lyft in the last year or so? Okay, how many of you thought in 1995 that was possible? Nobody. As a matter of fact, right now, even if I had a zillion taxi cab companies and they pay me money, I won't use them, because this create a market solution, create competition, health is great. Now there is Uber for trucks. Do you know that, Peter? That Uber for trucks actually happened to meet the executive of the company. It's just beginning. In controlled environment, I believe driverless trucks and driverless cars is gonna solve our capacity problem. Right now, I'm an engineer, right? Capacity is a function of speed and spacing. The computer that we as a human invent are much smarter in controlling that spacing. we could actually double the capacity of the freeway system we have by deploying not driverless cars, but the technology that exists today for vehicles to communicate with each other, 40 vehicles back. So I don't want to downplay, and I think the public sector, if they have a clear law, they should invest, and I know Mary's agency is big in this, in R&D, research and development for technology, because I believe technology is going to be the answer to our capacity issue.
And I'm going to make this the last question, but I want to give the last word to the chairwoman. So would you like to, any comments on this topic?
I just think this has been a very optimistic panel, and perhaps you were hoping for more disagreement and fireworks, and maybe we should have found something we could fight about.
Well,
but
we could create
actually,
that pretty
I think
easily,
there's
I'm sure.
Strong a degree of agreement here about priorities, and the different places that people come from have led us all to be, those of us who are old and those of us who are younger, optimists about technology in the context of sensible policy. So that's what we're here to try to do.
Well, and by my count, I think the stool now has about 10 legs from what I've heard. So please help me thank this really knowledgeable and effective panel.